Hello. Like you've heard 1,000 times before, Baldur's Gate 3 is really fun. You've probably also heard people talk about how much they like the romance in this game. Let's just cut to the chase. Romance is a euphemism in the realm of video games. I recall people being a lot more deceptive or coy about this enjoyment before, but I'm also noticing people these days are speaking a lot more honestly about what they're enjoying.
Do yourself a favor, see some titties, and throw some fireballs.
This game's players are extremely
Intimate.
And honestly, I'm a little jealous. I want to be able to enjoy these romantic subplots the same way, with the same uncritical glee I get from throwing people at their friends.
Good idea, I think.
But I have some questions about the way player freedom and player power fantasy end up interacting with the way gender is portrayed in this game. It's a blast if you don't think about it at all.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
So, let's think about it for a bit, shall we? Baldur's Gate 3 takes place in a setting where any consenting adult can love any other consenting adult for any reason.
Show me.
From what I've seen, there are no limits or qualifications for love between men, women, non-binary characters, or any other mixture of gender pairings. No characters appear to bear any ill will about these decisions either, which is fantastic. Fantasy writing has a great capacity to explore what our world could look like if some parts of it were a little better, the same way that sci-fi does a bit more often. And it's really nice to see some optimism instead of another grimdark fantasy world where swords and wizards are used to justify subjugating women. Anyway, in service to this gender equality, I didn't notice the script ever use any sexual preference identifiers, like gay, straight, bi, pan, etc. So, does that mean these concepts don't exist in Baldur's Gate 3? Well, yes and no. These concepts may have been excised from the narrative,
Your eyes tell a story, sweeting.
but like you've heard every other YouTuber thinky man with less than 100 subs say, stories are all informed by reality. And sometimes maybe fiction can influence reality too. Ooh. Not only is Baldur's Gate 3 informed by the writers creating it, who all come from real life, but it's recontextualized again by all of us who participate. And wouldn't you know it, players are really jazzed to participate.
Game for a sick mind, or for people just want to have fun.
They fixed what was wrong with FNAF. You can sex the bear.
Good game, cause tits, a smiley face.
I let a vampire bite me, and it all went downhill from there.
Demon Dami Mommy.
Gay, homosexual, gay.
Recommended. I love kissing gay vampires and strong red women.
This game is your dopamine supplier. You can have fun. You're free to do whatever you want to do. You can find your own solution. You can get in every of your early companion pants. You get full game without event buying the deluxe edition.
When will the first opportunity to have sex appear in this game? 6.9 hours on record.
A whole vampire romance game, 10 out of 10, gonna bang him again, and again, and again. What? There's actual story? Well, that's good too, I guess.
Hot Vampire Game of the Year.
Do some titties, and see some fireballs.
10 horny bears out of 10.
I love kissing gay vampires and strong red women.
Most importantly, you can sleep with the devil.
Shortly before deciding to write this script, I saw some Steam commenter say something to the effect of, "When I play the game, nobody is gay." This sucks, obviously, but very little that a homophobe sees while playing is ever going to challenge their worldview. There's an enormous variety of possibilities out there in Baldur's Gate 3, which is compellingly reminiscent of real life.
But it's also incredibly easy for someone to put on the blinders and ignore whatever they don't already enjoy. In some ways, it's easier here than in real life. By virtue of everyone being attracted to you, nobody in his group is gay because they won't act gay unless he picks the "be gay for me" dialogue choices.
I think I want to be alone now.
Baldur's Gate 3 never asks you to step into anyone else's experience unless you already want to. Representation is two-pronged. It's transformative for people to see themselves reflected back in their media. While I was editing, Neil Newbon also won Best Performance at the Game Awards. And I think something he said speaks better than anything I could say about how important this kind of representation is, and how well Baldur's Gate 3 did providing it.
One thing I will say, please, if that's okay, the community has reached out to so many of us at Larian and said they were seen and they were represented by this game when they lost hope, they felt isolated, they felt alone, and this game brought them together and gave them something to push through to help them all. And to you, I want to say thank you so much for seeing us. Appreciate it. You're not alone in this. None of us are. Thank you.
In this sense, Baldur's Gate 3 is amazing. There's such a wide variety of players that can see themselves in these stories, and that's fantastic, truly. But it's also important for other people to be able to see that you exist. And the game applies no pressure to see you if someone doesn't want to see you. The most you get is the occasional side character mention, like a Disney movie catering to international audience edits. One of the reasons internet chuds get so angry when a character in a show is a minority is because they don't want to see minorities in their entertainment at all. And with Baldur's Gate 3, they don't really have to. Or do they? Back in 2007, Mass Effect made headlines by having a single option for a lesbian romance. The idea of portraying sex in games at all was still very controversial. It was controversial enough that a single scene of a side boob was enough to send people screaming for the hills.
Cooper, have you ever played Mass Effect?
No.
Right, well, I think the fact is you talked about, another thing that you mentioned is that how it's, has full graphic nudity. That's completely incorrect.
This wasn't even 20 years ago, and Fox News controversy was enough to successfully pressure BioWare to cut a lesbian romance option from Mass Effect 2. Homophobes who weren't even playing the game were being catered to by cutting out content they would never interact with if they did play the game. BioWare would later reject pressure like this, especially in their fantasy series Dragon Age, which was created as a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. The third game, Dragon Age Inquisition, featured a wide variety of romances for different identities. For example, certain characters could only be romanced by a gay character.
What? There's no applause.
BioWare's last RPG was in 2017, with Mass Effect Andromeda, and their last popular RPG was Inquisition in 2014. But it turns out demand for this genre is actually still strong 9 years later, and Larian Studios is filling in the gap. They're also filling in some gaps, eh?
My name sounds so good in your mouth.
Because it turns out people like having some hot action in their fantasy adventures. This openness appears to be the natural next step in the lineage of roleplay-focused single-player RPGs.
I'd like to take you to bed now.
Baldur's Gate 3 is currently the fan favorite to win Game of the Year 2023 from the closest thing gaming has to the Oscars. Hi, Couch from the future, and wouldn't you know it, Baldur's Gate 3 did win Game of the Year while I was editing this. Interesting tidbit about that, too. In 2014, the first year that award show existed, Dragon Age Inquisition won Game of the Year. The Witcher 3 won it the year after that. So RPGs with massive sprawling adventures that also just happen to feature a ton of banging are pretty popular, it turns out. Do people who play video games just really wanna bang?
The point is, Baldur's Gate 3 is now leading the charge, and it seems like this complete lack of constraint in how the player wants to get down with gender or sex is a big part of why people are so into it. Did I say lack of constraint? Because I found out halfway through writing and recording this that it turns out the game has trans rep, which is a good thing, but bear with me as I explain why the way they chose to do this rep might throw a wrench into everything I understand about the game's storytelling. The game's trans character is named Nocturne, and she's voiced by Abigail Thorne. Nocturne keeps a journal, and in her journal she references people dead-naming her in malice, which means it turns out there are transphobes in Baldur's Gate.
Oh boy. If trans people face discrimination, what other elements of gender identity and sexuality are discriminated against? These are different but incredibly interlinked topics. My gut instinct is that Nocturne was included as a show of respect for Thorne and other trans players of the game, without regard for the in-world implications. To get to the only voiced line in the game that confirms Nocturne is trans, you have to choose to explore a missable zone, go down an optional side path, encounter a missable NPC, stop! Grab an inconspicuous item behind the NPC, avoid detonating a literal minefield, ignore the quest related to the inconspicuous item, and instead feed the quest item to a party member, disabling the quest it came from, and getting this line.
There was another. A tiefling boy with short horns and purple hair.
This line in a vacuum still doesn't tell us how this is related to the trans character. Keep this party member alive and in your party, which is technically optional, but most people will do this one. Play the game for another 50 hours or more to get to the end game. Finish this party member side quest. Walk down an unremarkable side hallway in the side quest area. This is technically where I failed after inadvertently doing every other part of this on my first playthrough. Finally, talk to Nocturne and get this one voice line.
You recall the memory Shadowheart recovered by eating the noble stalk. This must be the person she remembered.
If you even remember what this line was about, you finally got your single-voiced line that decisively confirms what these two are talking about. And it doesn't actually come from the dialogue between the characters, it comes from the narrator. There's probably also a conversation to be had here about how you learn this stuff. You're inferring context through childhood memories an amnesiac is sharing without knowing what she's sharing, and you're reading Nocturne's private journal. Is any of this our business? I'm definitely not the representative to do a full analysis of how this is represented, but the discussion is there to be had. That is, if Nocturne is meant to be analyzed as a full character, and that's the problem, none of this feels intentional. It's treated like a quirky side quest or an Easter egg. What I am advocating for here is that if Baldur's Gate 3 wants to comment on trans rights, I want them to comment more meaningfully. Say something we can't ignore. Make Nocturne a recruitable party member. Show us what Nocturne's life means to her. If transphobia is part of your setting, show us Shadowheart defending her friend instead of hiding that entire interaction in a text log. Make it something we see. If transphobia is not part of your setting, don't include a reference just long enough to remind me that transphobes exist before you continue pretending transphobia doesn't exist. As it's presented, it feels marginal. Nocturne's single appearance in the game is so minor that you've actually seen all of it in this essay. Her entire part of the story in a 100+ hour game is over in like 3 minutes. This was a very long tangent for a video about romance in a video game. And to be clear, you cannot romance Nocturne. After you meet her and have this single conversation, she just becomes a vendor. Or vanishes from the game world never to be seen again. But I bring this up because it's critical evidence of the point I'm making about romance, gender, sexuality in Baldur's Gate 3. It's written for fun, not depth. Everything important is engaged with at the player's whim.
Everything the player doesn't want to engage with is easily ignored. Gender is addressed, sometimes, if it's convenient or funny.
Charming. She mustn't have nursed him enough as a child. Or too much.
It's for all these reasons that I believe Baldur's Gate 3's romances are exceptionally fun toys for fantasy-loving adults, especially the horny ones.
Keep them clean and dry, apply a bit of seed oil now and again, and they'll shine.
There's another feature where you can directly play as one of the player characters instead of creating your own. You take on their role for the entire adventure if you do this, and there are some unique differences in the story. It's a modern take on the system from Dragon Age Origins, where you could decide where you came from, and it's rad. But when you consider it through the lens of romance, it means you can pilot any of the main companions into the arms of any of the other ones. It further devalues who these characters are, because even core parts of them become insignificant in the face of allowing total player freedom. Would Lae'zel and Shadowheart ever really become romantically entangled? Or are you just really into enemies to lovers? Would Will ever turn on all those refugees he swore to protect just to bang a night elf? A drow? Mush any of them together the way you wanna. It's all up to you. Knock together your digital Barbies until you get bored and decide two of the Ken dolls should kiss instead. Limiting choice can make a world feel more real. If I couldn't date every single party member in any circumstance I chose, those restrictions would tell me more about who those characters are. Characterization becomes stronger because you learn what they will and won't do. And yes, you could choose to use sexualization as characterization. As it stands, Baldur's Gate 3 is more like a dating sim. It's a cozy place where people come to get whatever desires they want satisfied. Every single party member was designed to be flirted with, and they're all subsequently hunky for it. There's nobody in your core group that's just like a monster, or a ghost, or a dog.
Hound warriors.
I can't help feeling the artifice, and that's before I play the video game. Every party member in Baldur's Gate 3 has a character sheet full of equipment. Among that equipment, every character has an underwear slot. The underwear has no stats, but every named character has unique underwear with a little joke written on it. If you defeat some of these characters without recruiting them, you can still loot their underwear. Can you imagine an actual tabletop role-playing experience where your dungeon master asks you what your character's underwear looked like? You can also trade underwear and equip it between party members however you want. Everyone can wear everyone else's underwear. You can trade them like baseball cards. On my first run, I had a party member I knew I didn't want to use that run. So, like the loot goblin I am, I took all his stuff and sold it. Little did I realize, in my fervor, I'd grabbed and sold his underwear too. The character proceeded to stand around in my camp butt naked for the next 50 hours. Nobody ever commented on this, him or anyone else. He would just stand around with his hog out and discuss whatever plot was happening. It felt like I was playing a cheap Skyrim mod. Unparalleled freedom to explore whatever options you want to see. It's wonderful for player freedom, and terrible for creating any sense of consequence. Throw your friends at each other while everyone else is naked, and then reload for fun. Baldur's Gate 3 is still really good, and the steps it has taken toward representation are a big step forward for an industry afraid to take risks. I wish there was more to the trans representation, but I could say this about almost every story under the sun. and most of those would have done worse than Baldur's Gate 3 did. But these comments I showed you earlier, they're a core part of the adventure for a lot of the players. A lot of people just want to go on a fun adventure with their gay vampire boyfriend, or their big red barbarian girlfriend who's literally hot enough to melt your skin. Maybe that's fine. Baldur's Gate 3 knows how to give you exactly what you want, so why not indulge? But I also wouldn't look at this style of wish fulfillment writing and claim it's the best written RPG of all time. And there's a lot of people who are claiming it's the best written RPG ever made. I still want to keep playing it. I'm still sorting through my thoughts about it, too. But the romance? The sex? So anyway, I'm covered in blood, and Minthara broke my jaw without using her hands. This partial quote is about a plot arc in Act 1, where you lead a band of evil goblins to slaughter a camp full of helpless refugees, including children.
Oh, gods.
If you do this, Minthara, the evil elf lady in charge of those goblins, will come to your camp and offer to fuck your character in a fully animated cutscene for over 30 seconds. It's well animated, fun, smut. And people love it. Now, I do want to say that I don't think role-playing as evil or role-playing sex are bad things. They're fine. Fun, even.
I am the danger.
What I am saying is that having the payoff for an incredibly evil role-playing decision being some well-animated smut, it's a little weird, isn't it? When you think about the world and its construction beyond quick, cheap fun, it's weird. I don't think you're meant to think about it. So, what do you think? Hello, this is the credits. If I had a Patreon or something to promote, I would, but I don't right now as of this recording. So yeah, if you really like this and want to show some support, consider donating to something like the Trevor Project or Mermaids on behalf of Sentient Furniture Everywhere. I also really want to thank my wonderful friends seen here who all unbelievably trusted me with those Steam review recordings without even knowing how I would use them. And also one of my best friends in the world here who, when I asked her, "Would you draw me a toilet?" she asked, "When do you need it by?" Thank you, my friends. Your amazing work is a big part of what inspired me to give YouTube another shot.